What you're seeing is a therapy session of a young girl who remembered a gang rape, then a murder, and then sexual abuse by her parents. The only problem is they never really happened. She says these memories were pure figments of her imagination that her therapist helped her create. This is Roma. She says she went to a therapist because she was stressed. She thinks all she needed was a vacation. Instead, she said she was manipulated by the therapist into believing that her whole family had sexually molested her. These are Roma's parents, George and Ramona. They have always been loving parents to Roma, so you can imagine what happened in their lives, how it was turned upside down when they found out that their daughter was accusing her father of sexual acts that had never really happened. And this is Dr. Richard Ofshe. He is an expert on something called false memory syndrome, and also a Pulitzer Prize winner. He says that stories like Roma's are not uncommon. It's called false memory syndrome, and he says there are a lot of unscrupulous therapists out there who are harming patients, destroying families, and maybe hurting the mental health industry. And he thinks they're doing it for the money. Wow. Roma, let's start with you. Why don't you take us back? How did you end up going to a therapist in the first place? You were stressed?
Yes, it was back in 1986 in the summertime. I was working 2 full-time jobs. I was going to university full-time. I was a single mother, and my brother had moved in with his wife, brand new bride, and their 2-year-old little boy, and my daughter broke her arm roller skating, and everything just went. That summer it was just incredibly stressful. By September, I went down to unemployment insurance, and I said I'd like to just get on unemployment insurance, take a little vacation. And they said, well, you have to have this form filled out by a doctor. So I went to the campus psych center, and I talked to a psychologist there. She asked me what I did when I was under a lot of stress. And I said to her that I usually just switch to autopilot and keep on going.
I say that to people about my show. I go on autopilot and I keep on going. That's not... So what'd she say to that?
This fascinated her. She said, oh, do you have a name for this autopilot?
It's called autopilot.
I didn't know what she was talking about. And she said that she had met this psychiatrist who she'd always wanted to work with, and she'd like me to go and see him with her. And she said that he was an expert in multiple personality disorder. I told her that I was really afraid of going to a psychiatric hospital because I saw that movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and, and I said electric shock treatments and drugs and hospitalization.
Now, all you wanted was a vacation, and this is to fill out the form
just to
get the money for the vacation.
Unemployment insurance, just for a few weeks, just a break. So she said, don't worry about it. Multiple personality disorder is the only disorder that never requires shock treatments, never requires drug treatments, and you won't be hospitalized. She says, don't worry. So I thought, well, I have had several years of theater training on campus. When she's enthusiastic enough with this, I can probably pull it off. I saw the movie Sybil. It shouldn't be too difficult. But the main thing was I needed that form filled out. I was living on $600 a month. I was supporting my family on $600 a month. I needed the form filled out for unemployment insurance. She took me to see this doctor the next week. And within the hour, he shook my hand. He said, welcome to multiple personality disorder therapy. And I couldn't believe it. I said, are you sure? I was starting to feel a little bit guilty about lying about this. He said, oh, absolutely sure. Absolutely sure.
Now, you are admitting that you were lying to the doctor.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you make up things and tell him a colorful story?
Oh, about 45 minutes had gone by in that therapy session, and they kept on wanting me to switch personalities, and I sort of felt uneasy about pretending to switch personalities, and I just tried to remember that movie Sybil, tried to remember one scene in it, so I thought, okay, well, I'll just do this scene out of the movie, and that's easy enough, just pretend I'm a little child, and a couple minutes later, that's all they needed. They were quite satisfied with that. And so after he shook my hand and welcomed me into MPD therapy, I just reached into my school bag and I said, okay, fill out this form for me, please. And he did, and that's how it all started.
And you had your vacation?
I was on unemployment insurance after that.
Okay.
And I went to therapy sessions once a week, and within a few weeks, I was convinced that I actually did have multiple personality disorder.
You began to believe your own stuff.
I started to actually believe it. He said, well, were you ever abused as a child? And I said, well, what do you mean by abused? There's just so many degrees of abuse. And I said, well, I wasn't a happy child. We moved around a lot, And he said, well, did you ever get punished for anything that you don't remember doing? And I said, well, yes, I got punished a lot for things that I never did, but there's an explanation for it. I said, just a few years ago, my younger sister had broke down with guilt and said, I have to tell you this, I'm so sorry, but when you were little, I have two sisters, a year older, a year younger. When I was a little kid, kindergarten age, my older sister had made a pact with my younger sister that if anything went wrong, I was to be blamed. And this went on for about 15 years. And so I was always getting punished for things I never did. I told this doctor that. I said, well, yeah, but here's the explanation for it. And it didn't matter what the explanation was. He just said, well, you've been switching personalities then.
Now, you're under the doctor's care, going often?
Once a week in the beginning.
Then?
And then later it was twice a week, and then later it was 3 times a week.
And then?
I was hospitalized. I was committed.
You were committed?
Yeah.
And what did you discover about your past?
Well, I discovered a lot about my past when I was put on massive amounts of drugs and put under massive hours and hours of hypnotherapy. And basically he would say, do you ever remember being sexually abused by your parents? And I said, no, I was never sexually abused by my parents. I mean, I got spankings, I got, sent to my room, grounded, you name it, normal family things. But they never sexually abused me. He says, how do you know that? And I said, well, I don't know it, but I don't remember them ever doing that. And he said, well, did they ever do this? Did they ever, it's so hard for me, my dad's sitting right here. Oh, goodness. Said, did he ever touch you when you were naked? And I said, well, we got into trouble. We were fooling around in the bathtub and just got a spanking while I was in the bathtub and wasn't wearing any clothes. So that's sexual abuse.
Uh-huh.
And then he'd say, well, do you remember ever being around a lot of people wearing black robes or in circles? Or I said, well, I don't really remember that, but when he put me under hypnosis, he'd give me all these suggestions, things to think about. So the next week I'd come back and I'd say, I remember what we talked about the week before. Well, I've been having a lot of nightmares about that. He says, well, nightmares are really flashbacks of real events. So everything that you were dreaming about really did happen to you.
Uh-huh.
So slowly but surely things got more and more bizarre because every session he'd talk about more and more bizarre things and I'd have nightmares about them. I'd go home right after every session. I'd have a terrible headache. I'd go straight to bed and I'd sleep until the next morning.
So that was your life?
That was my life.
And then it got worse. What did you do?
I started becoming extremely depressed. I told the doctor that I wanted to quit therapy. And he knew one of the main things about me was my strong religious beliefs. So he said, if you quit multiple personality disorder therapy, when you die, you'll have multiple personalities in heaven. No, he was the expert.
Right.
How am I going to argue with that? It didn't sound right to me, but he was the expert.
Now, even with the drugs, in your head, Roma, were you believing what was going on?
Yeah,
I believed it.
I didn't sue my parents, as many have, because I was terrified that if I did sue them, they would kill me.
Kill you?
I was convinced that they would kill me if I did anything.
But what did you do to your parents? Stay away from them?
We lived in different cities anyways.
Okay.
So it wasn't too difficult to stay away. It was a dilemma, because on one hand, I really craved their affection because I wanted to be with them and talk to them and be part of a normal family. But on the other hand, I kept on having these thoughts that, well, gee, if this doctor is saying all of this is true, then it must be true. He's the expert.
Yes, because doctors are up there on a pedestal, and to a certain extent, it has to be happening. Mm-hmm. When you started, how did you start to realize that the memories may not be true? What was the change that happened in your life?
This is about 4 years later.
4 years?
Yeah. I had lost custody of my daughter to Child and Family Services. They would not let me see her. I still don't have custody. She's almost 18 now. And in order to win custody of her, the only slim chance that I had was to get off of all the drugs I was on, get away from the therapist that I was seeing, and get out of the psychiatric hospitals. And my boyfriend at the time and I were talking about getting married, and he said, I'm sorry, dear, we can't afford to get married because it's costing about $1,000 a month for the drugs you're on. And then my therapist went on a 6-week vacation, which was the best thing that ever happened to me, was his vacation. So my boyfriend took me away out into the woods where there was no distractions, no support groups, no therapists, no drugs. And I started getting a little bit clearer. My mind started getting a little bit clearer. And I picked up this Women's World magazine where this woman in California had admitted that she had also lied about being a multiple personality disorder person. And she talked about losing her home, her job, her family, everything that she lost. And it just, well, that's me. I've lost absolutely everything too. And she's admitting it was a lie. And I thought back, well, 4 years ago, this did start as a lie. It just, the lie was buried now, and it's just started to come forward again. So that one, yeah, this is better. This sounds more real. No, I wasn't abducted by aliens. No, I don't have alien baby living on the world any place. And no, my parents weren't high priests of a satanic ritual abuse cult. And
this is the stuff talk shows are made out of. George, how did you find out that Roma was accusing you of being sexual with her, of sexually abusing her?
It didn't come directly, Sally. It was basically when she was in the hospital, our granddaughter was left alone, and we wanted to take care of her. And my oldest daughter said, well, we'll take care of her, Dad, and she can go to school. And Roma accused her of kidnapping. And the Mounties came pounding on the door and took our granddaughter away and took her back, put her in foster care. And as any family, we were a little upset and unhappy with what had happened, but we saw our granddaughter for a short time, and then we were told by a social worker, you can't see your granddaughter anymore. You sexually abused your daughter and your granddaughter.
What went through your mind when you heard that?
It was devastating. It was like somebody smashed you one. I'm sorry, it just keeps coming back, and you think, what can you do? It's the most horrendous, the most despicable thing that anyone can do to a child. And you did it. And it just wasn't true. And how can you fight it? You can't fight it. When you're accused, you're guilty. In our society, if you're accused of molesting your child, you're guilty. You did it. And it was a while. It took a while, and Roma wouldn't talk to us. We couldn't talk to her on the phone. The doctor wouldn't talk to us. He wouldn't even tell us how long she was going to be in the hospital.
What a nightmare. It's coming at you from everywhere. It's coming at you from everywhere. It's like you're going to wake up and it's going to be okay, and your child won't talk to you, and people are saying...
Sally, there's no one is going to not believe this. Why would anybody, why would a doctor, why would social workers, why would these people that you honor say this if it didn't happen? And it seemed everywhere we turned, it was getting worse and worse, but to see our granddaughter, who we loved so dearly, we couldn't even talk to her, we couldn't even see her, there was no Christmases, no birthdays.
Did it enough to eat your heart, right? How did you comfort him?
Well, I guess we've always comforted each other. I guess in knowing we have faith in each other, many times we just sit and hold
Let me
each
ask
other.
you something. At any time, did you believe he could have done that?
Oh, absolutely not.
You knew?
Oh, no.
Thank heavens, right?
That's a horrendous
God.
thought to have.
I understand that your family turned their back on you. Is that correct?
My family?
Yes.
Well, my told me, if any of this is not true, I just won't have anything to do with you anymore.
Whoa.
And my sister, my younger sister, she just didn't really want to talk about it. She still just doesn't really want to talk about it. I don't have any contact at all with my older sister, but my brother stuck in there. I love my brother very, very much, and he was always there for me. He never believed any of it, but he was always there. He always talked to me.
Well, we have the three of you here now. Obviously, when you got off the drugs and were woman enough, and gosh, I really think that's amazing that you could come forward and say, I lied. How did you get together? What was that like for you?
Well, the very first time I spent a night out at their place by the beach alone, without a boyfriend or anything with me, I remember they had the hide-a-bed pulled out, and the house was all dark, and they were already asleep in bed, and I was lying there thinking, are they going to kill me? Are they going to kill me tonight? But that was just this last summer. And I thought, oh, this is nonsense. Just forget it. This is so silly. I just managed to go to sleep. But it's taken an awfully long time to get over, if I ever will get over the effects of everything.
And you?
Well,
Can one ever get over that?
it's not so much getting over it. I think the thing is that the reason I'm here is because of Roma and because of all the people that are going through this, and it's a living hell. It's not something that you can get over. It's something you can live with.
Have you two talked about this?
We don't talk a great deal to that. One thing we did, we put all the family pictures on the wall. We took them out of the trunk and took them out of things and put them in frames, and we put them all over the walls, and we said, sleep in this bedroom tonight, woman, take a look. And she'd be in there, yeah. Where was this? What was that? How come I'm smiling? And I think, okay, just keep looking. Oh, well, this was this place, because a lot was not in her mind. She couldn't remember places and things we'd done, and she couldn't imagine that she was ever happy in her life, because she didn't have a life that she could remember. It was an implant of some insidious son of a gun.
Think about how many people this must have happened to and what would happen if it happened to you. When we come back, this woman says her false memories led her to kidnap her own children. Please stay with us. Women who say they are victims of something that could be called false memory syndrome. And I want you to stay with us on this one. It not only involves the medical profession, but the profession that I'm in. I think it involves talk shows, too. Now, according to the news magazines this month, this could be the biggest story in psychiatry in a decade. I get the feeling from our last guest that Roma is still on shaky ground about her past, still not sure. Is that what you're nodding?
Oh, absolutely.
Still not sure of what's happening. And I also get the feeling, I don't know if you do, that they really haven't talked about this. Right? I'm getting the feeling, have you? Is this the first time you've talked about this?
Right here on your stage is the very first time we were.
This is the first time you've discussed it. In other words, the three of you have not sat down. If I were you, my rage would be unbearable. I know you love your daughter. I know that. I understand. But, all right, meet Maria. It's just that when real life things happen like that, it absolutely fascinates me, because I was staring at them and wondering, they haven't gone through this. Meet Maria. Maria started therapy for anorexia and bulimia and ended up believing her father had sexually molested her. She even kidnapped her own children because she was frightened of her own family. Now, what's the transition between anorexia and bulimia and leading you to believe that you had been molested?
Well, Sally, when you have an eating disorder, your brain is already fuzzy. You can't think straight. And then they add drug therapy to it. And then they put you with a sexual abuse therapist who's supposed to know what she's talking about. She's supposed to know.
Why bulimia and sexual abuse? Is there some kind of a connotation?
Well, they believe that if bulimia, you're trying to throw up things that you've ingested or things that have been put in your mouth.
Sexual.
Yeah, sexually. So,
I never made that connection.
yeah, well, they do.
Never? Did you make that connection? Ever?
That's what the therapists tell you. And the sexual abuse therapist then worked with me 2 hours, 2 days a week, and then also in group therapy. And when we did the group therapy, then they have all these other women in there who've been sexually abused, and you hear all their stories. And then she suggests things to you, and then you go to bed, you have nightmares. You have nightmares about the things that have been suggested to you. Then they tell you to write down your dreams. I wrote down my dreams, my nightmares, and then they said, well, this must be repressed memories, things that you've repressed, things that you didn't remember, and these things happened to you. And I became so frightened of my family. I didn't know who to trust. I did not know who to trust anymore. You have to trust the therapist, because they're supposed to know what they're doing. They're supposed to be
doctors.
Yeah, they're supposed to know. And your family, you don't know if you can trust them, if you can't trust them, you don't know what to think anymore. You just get so confused. And then the minute, that you say you're confused, well, then they throw other things at you. And
So what did you do?
Well, I
your
became
family?
so frightened of my family and what they would do. I was told that they would kill my children, that they were going to kill me by my 30th birthday, that I took my kids, they flew me home, I took my children, I packed everything, all of our clothes in the car, and I left. I went into hiding. They put me in a church with families that hid me and kept me from my family. My family came looking for me. I knew my family was there. They kept me hidden in this house with this woman, away from my family. They lied to my family, told my family they didn't know where I was.
When did you first start to realize that the memories may not be real?
Well, I always doubted the memories. I always doubted. I always had that doubt there. And when I would question the therapist and say, I don't think this is real, I'm so confused, they would say, well, who's the author of confusion? Satan. And there you go. So there you're sucked back in again. So there you are.
This is Maria's mother, Linda, who was falsely accused of sexually molesting her granddaughters. And this is Maria's sister, Joy, who says the therapist also tried to make her believe that she had been the victim of her mother's sexual abuse. Linda, how did you first learn about Maria's beliefs that she'd been molested?
Well, Sally, for me, it was very fragmented. Usually in therapy, the girls confront their parents, and that's how they find out. But for me, it was fragmented. I wasn't even told when she went to the hospital. She would go into the hospital, her husband would call me and say, could you take care of the children? And I'd say, is she in the hospital again? And he, yes, and what hospital? Well, I don't know if I want to tell you that. And he was very uncooperative, and it was hard for me. And then when I was sitting, I read the book, The Courage to Heal. She had it in her bookcase. And I just thought it was a book that was really filled with hatred and anger. And I felt bad for the people that would even write it because of the hatred and anger that I seen there. There was no love, there was no forgiveness, there was no healing that I thought should come from therapy if someone was going to have you in therapy for healing. It just seemed to spread hatred.
Bit by bit by bit. Joy, how did the therapist first approach you and try to convince you that you too had been molested?
Well, when first disappeared, of course, being a very close family, we absolutely had to fly down there immediately. We flew to where we believed that she was, very close to the hospital that she had been staying in, and we looked for her. We found phone numbers off of her phone bill. We did everything that we could possibly do. We called every phone number. We went to every house that she was possibly associated with. Everybody lied to us. They hadn't seen her. Oh, we're so worried about her too. She disappeared from us. We haven't seen her either.
They were lying to protect her.
Pretending that they were on our side as well. So, of course, we didn't know who to believe. At the end of the week, I was so frustrated that I called one of the therapists, told him exactly who I was, that sometimes I had told lies. I had to in order to get any information that I could. So I came honest. I said, I am his sister. I lived with in the same bedroom until I was in junior high. We shared a wall in the same bedroom forever until she left home. I know that it could not have happened, and I felt that that therapist needed to know. And I told her everything. I told her, my mother was a Sunday school teacher for 25 years, that this could not have possibly happened. Well, most satanic abusers do have a false front in the church, so this is no excuse. I mean, you have no excuse. But I said, I found some satanic books on his refrigerator that her therapist had given her, a prior therapist. And I said, I think you should know that before you guys even talked to her, someone had put these things in her mind, or she believed she was getting information about Satanism. And I said, I read those books. I read the first 25 pages and got so ill I couldn't read anymore. Oh, the doctor said, do you realize that the fact that you couldn't read that, the fact that that made you ill means that you were probably abused too? And
Unbelievable.
I'm spinning. My head is spinning. So
this feeling of the family and what has happened to all of you, this outer space. Well, you said it. At one time you thought you were having alien babies landing from outer space. When we come back, Dr. Richard Ofshe says, if you're going to a therapist who really insists that you have these repressed memories, or maybe that you have multiple personality disorder, he may only be out for the money. And that's not really the problem. Stay with us. I want to say that their stories were much more complicated, and there was a pastor who lied to you. There was the hospital, there's religious organizations, the very people that all of us, good little girls, were brought up to trust. And we just didn't go into all of those details, but I would say you and I would have a hard time if a religious person and a doctor and all of them all got together. We would have to be right and they would have to, perhaps be wrong. With us now is Dr. Richard Ofshe. He is a social psychologist over there at the University of California in Berkeley, and he's an expert in this area. It's the area of false memory syndrome. Now, he's going to be very, very avant-garde, I would say. Dr. Ofshe is saying there's no such thing as repressed memory. Now, no one questions that childhood sexual abuse is widespread. I mean, there are millions of people today who have memories of abuse. So, what's causing this? You're saying it doesn't happen?
What I'm saying is sexual abuse is undoubtedly real, and the people to whom it's happened know it. What we're talking about...
Now, halt. Sexual abuse is real, but the children to whom it's happened always know they were
know
sexual.
it.
That's absolutely against all the talk shows we've been doing, where people sit there and say, I had been sexually abused and I didn't know it, and then my husband came to touch me and I flashed back and it was my father?
And that's the product of the problem that we're dealing with. The problem is one of being convinced that there are these hidden memories, that the human mind can do that.
We don't have hidden memories?
Not of this sort. Amnesia, certainly. And amnesia is well understood. What happens when people become amnesic is they may lose details of what happened, but they don't lose awareness of the context. A person who's been assaulted, a woman who's been raped, may not be able to say exactly what happened. She will know she's been raped. To suggest anything else is crazy.
When I said you were going to be far out as far as talk shows and the popular ideology is concerned, I was right. You also say there's no such thing as multiple personality disorder? I mean, wasn't Sybil a real person? I've done shows on people sitting here with multiple personalities. Have I been taken?
Roma, at one point,
you're saying
would
yes.
have told you she was a multiple personality and she would have been sincere about it. But Roma was convinced that that happened. And let me make something clear. What I'm saying is not just my opinion. What I'm reporting to you is the consensus of the mainstream of the mental health industry, the mainstream of scientific research on this subject. What's happened over the last decade is that a relatively small number of people have promoted this idea, and it has taken on a life of its own. And we're seeing some of the victims of this on either side of me.
But Dr. Ofshe, I have sat in that chair next to famous psychiatrists who brought me their patients who were like Sybil's, and they had this life, this life, this life. Are you telling me that some of the people I've trusted over the 10 years of this show, people with millions of initials after their names? I don't know what to say to you.
That's what's happened, and that's what's becoming clear. The point is, this has been going on for a decade, and it's only now that enough people, enough responsible, serious people, the leadership of the psychiatric community, the medical research community, the American Medical Association, are now becoming sufficiently concerned about the damage that's been done that they're now starting to be willing to air this in public. This is the psychiatric quackery of the 20th century, and we're watching it unravel, and there are going to be more and more stories of the sort you've just heard, because this is what's happened.
You're saying that magazines and all their articles, I had multiple personalities, I was sexually abused, they've been duped. You've been saying some of the celebrities who've come on and told me that, we've been duped. You're saying talk show hosts have been duped. What about the psychiatrist who wrote these books? The bookshelf in my bookstore is filled with these psychiatrists telling you.
That's right, and that's what makes a really good scandal.
You have a scandal.
When something reaches this proportion, that's when it's necessary to stop, take a step back, look at it, say, was there any basis for this? Look, you could go back into the literature on race and intelligence, and you could find eminent biologists, eminent psychologists saying it's clear that race is related to intelligence. We know that that's nonsense. But if you step back 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you find people saying it. We are seeing the same thing, and these women are the living proof of it.
This is Karen. She remembered being sexually abused by her mother. Now, her father has now confirmed what she remembered. So, what happened? First, the story. Then I have to ask him.
I had flown home to visit my best friend from childhood, and I was staying with my parents. And every time my best friend came over to the house, my mother would tell her that she wished she would have just killed me and been done with it when I was a child. That was the start. 2 weeks later, I began to have flashbacks and nightmares. And I had been in a group therapy session for adult children of alcoholics because I was dealing with my parents' alcoholism. And one of the women walked up behind one of the men and put her hands on his shoulders, and I couldn't understand why he was not upset, because I was just about hysterical. You know, he should have been frightened. So they did a little scenario with me and with people making noises behind me. And I turned around and looked over my right-hand shoulder, and a woman was approaching me, and I ran out of the office. I mean, it was one step, I was to the door, and I was across.
None of this had been part of your consciousness at all. This triggered you to remember that. Then who confirmed that it really happened?
My father, my sister, and my brother-in-law have all confirmed that it has happened. And I'd like to point out, too, that when I confronted my father 3 years ago, he told me a story of when I was 13 years old, that him and my mother were in the kitchen. I was in my bedroom. My mother ran out of the kitchen, and the next thing he heard were screams coming out of my bedroom, and she was apparently beating me rather severely. He picked her up, threw her out of my bedroom, told her never to do that again. I was 13 years old when that happened. My father told me that story 3 years ago. My sister confirmed it last July, and I have no memory of it.
So you strongly disagree with Dr. Ofshe?
Strongly disagree. You know, I've done a lot of research on both sides of this issue, both on traumatic memory, what false memory syndrome is saying. False Memory Syndrome Foundation is not using traumatic memory in their examples. They are using narrative memory, and I think that the False Memory Syndrome Foundation is nothing more than a front for a bunch of pedophiles in denial.
Dr. Ofshe?
People forget most of the events that happen in their lives. A particular beating, not surprising. Someone could forget it. Someone can be reminded of it. But the stories that we're getting are stories of 5 years, 10 years, hundreds, if not thousands of events of abuse about which the person has no knowledge prior to entering therapy. If someone's reminded of something that they haven't thought about for years, that's ordinary memory.
I'm hearing you saying that although her father, she didn't remember it, and her father later confirmed it, that she must have remembered it?
No, what I'm saying is, first, I don't know the circumstances of what was actually alleged.
Okay.
I don't know what the father, in fact, confirmed. Both of her parents apparently, both of her parents were apparently alcoholic. I don't know whether or not she convinced them that something happened. I don't know what happened. What I do know is that there is no confirmed case in human history of this kind of massive repression of years-long worth of abuse. It simply has never been recorded in any culture in all of human history. Now we're getting people who are saying it's routine and it's all happening out of this context of people looking for these
And you are
explanations.
ignoring the literature, over 150 years worth of literature, clear from Genet and Charcot. Freud identified it and eventually reversed what he found. You are ignoring the extensive literature out there. And I'd also like to point out that, again, that the false memory syndrome has no scientific evidence. This is simply a term coined by two people who were accused originally by their daughter of sexually abusing them. You have no scientific evidence.
That's absolute nonsense.
If I am so suggestible.
Absolute nonsense. If you were to look at the Scientific Advisory Board of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, you would find the world's leading authorities in their areas of specialty. These are people who are the world's absolute leading authorities on memory. The chair of the psychiatry department at Johns Hopkins, people on the psychiatry faculty at Harvard, people who are acknowledged world experts on their particular subjects, and they are
Okay.
saying this is crazy.
Narrative memory. All right, we've got a real disagreement, and for a lot of people, it's pretty darn important. We will be right back. What Dr. Ofshe has said is really so tremendously alarming that must throw an awful lot of mental health people into absolute chaos. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
You're calling, are some of them absolute charlatans?
There are people who have gone way too far based on not knowing enough.
That's a charlatan.
They're overstepping what they should be doing because there's no basis for what they're doing. And what's starting to happen now, and the thing that's really scaring them, is that the malpractice litigation is now beginning. And we are going to see a wave of malpractice litigation that's going to make what happened in obstetrics look like a walk in the park.
Oh, wow. I have to tell you that when we called therapists who disagree with you to appear on the show, they refused to come on the same set. There was one therapist who didn't want to appear on the program, but she did allow us to read a statement. This is from an article that she's publishing on the subject, and she says, childhood physical abuse, domestic and criminal violence, and war-related trauma can all result in complete or partial amnesia and or other disturbances of memory, especially when the traumatic experiences are met with silence, indifference, or further assault and abuse, both remembered and forgotten, that bring people into or may emerge during the course of psychotherapy. She's saying the same, not the same thing as you're saying, the opposite.
That's a fairy tale.
It's a fairy tale.
That's a fairy tale for which there is no scientific evidence whatsoever. What we know about amnesia says it's exactly the opposite of that. It just doesn't happen that way, and too many therapists, a small percentage, but a significant number, have committed themselves to this, and they have produced stories that confirm what they want to be there, and now their careers are at risk, and they have got to defend themselves.
This is a twist on this story. This is Sarah, and Sarah she hasn't forgotten anything. She agrees with you insofar as she has always known that her mother physically and sexually abused her as a child. And when she confronted her mother, the mother said, it's false memory syndrome. You didn't really remember those things. Is that correct?
I've always remembered what happened when I was a child, so false memory syndrome shouldn't really apply to me. It doesn't apply to me, but I think it's a very convenient excuse used by accused parents.
What do we say about that twist?
We can't say what her mother did or did not do, but I can clarify the false memory syndrome is not about sexual abuse. It is about fraud in psychotherapy. The misconception is brought about because people do not want to attend our open meetings. We hide nothing, Sally. The therapists who are doing this are hiding our children from us. We are cut off from, they call it families of origin are cut off. If you do not go along with it or believe what's happened, you are cut off completely. If you believe, then it may be okay, but until the confrontation occurs. And the family of choice is then reinstituted. You receive a family of choice through your group therapy sessions.
So it's stealing people.
Right.
And there's a lot of money in it. Thank you. When we come back, we have an attorney. You started to talk about the lawsuits. We have an attorney who says, if you think you've been the victim of a therapist, there is something you can do about it. Stay with us.
How you feel, because when I was deep into therapy, when I did believe everything my therapist told me, when I believed I had multiple personality disorder and was sexually abused in every humanly possible way, I would have stood up and been just as passionate as you have been. I would have, if I'd won a lottery, I would have given all the money to the therapist. I would have laid my life down for his beliefs. But I can also tell you that I was sexually abused by a stranger on a beach when I was in grade 4. And I remember that very, very clearly. And I told my psychiatrist that. I told him that my mother was with me, that she did not know what was going on. By the end of the session, he had me believing that not only did she know what was going on, he had me believing that she had set it up.
Whoa, take a break. We'll be right back. That no psychiatrist or doctor has ever prompted her in those memories. I said I'd say that for her. I want you to meet Zachary Bravos. He's an attorney who is an expert in the field of child abuse cases. Zachary, what recourse does somebody have if they think they've been a victim of a therapist?
Sally, if you think you've been a victim of a therapist, that you've had memories implanted in you by improper therapy, you have the legal recourse to sue that therapist for the damages that you sustain.
Well, Dr. Ofshe is saying we're going to see suits like this like you can't believe. Is he right?
Sally, we're not talking about a few people up on a stage that have been victimized like this. We're talking about thousands of people across the country, and typically these people lose their families, they lose their homes, they lose their careers, they lose their savings, they lose everything that they have, and they begin a descent into mental illness.
The abuse makes them mentally ill?
The therapy makes them mentally ill. The longer they are in therapy, the
The
worse
abuse
they
by the
get.
therapist is, of course, what I meant. Makes them mentally
Absolutely.
ill.
I've seen hospital records in which children dumped into hospitals because an older sibling recovered memories, pressured to come up with the memories, became psychotic in response to the pressure because they simply couldn't stand it. That's what's going on in some mental hospitals. Sally, we're seeing children hospitalized for as long as 3 or 4
about believing Dr. Ofshe from my own experience of sitting up there on that home base talking to all these people. And then I say, have they all lied to me? And the lawyer said, no, they didn't lie to you. They honestly believed that what they were telling you is the truth. Thank you for being with us today.
Some members of our audience will receive, and a promotional fee has been provided by